Well, welcome to Abercynon, a place that was once called Navigation House, and there's a very good reason for that. And I'm going to be talking about the Taff Vale Railway, and it's going to be a task. Trying to get the Taff Vale Railway into a 10-minute video is not going to be easy, because there are so many facets to this company that it's very difficult to know where to start. So let's start at the beginning. This year we're celebrating Railway 200 years since the Stockton and Darlington started services in 1825. And at that time in Wales there were no railways. There were plenty of tramways, but no railways. In fact, Wales were very good at building L-shaped plateway tramways to shift goods, freight mainly, down to canal heads and down to railheads. And if you look at this map, you can see the number that were built around the place. 6 years after the Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened, and they had the Rainhill trials with the rocket locomotives, a bill went to Parliament to build a railway here in South Wales. It would start in Merthyr, and it would come down the Taff Valley alongside the River Taff and end up in Cardiff. And this was the Taff Vale Railway. The first 16 miles of it started here, as I say, at Abercynon. It was called Navigation House. Now, at that time, there was the headquarters of the Glamorganshire Canal Company, and that was in a building called Navigation House. And in actual fact, this trading estate that the station on is still called Navigation Park. But today it is called Abercynon. That 16 miles went down from here, down through Pontypridd, which in those days was called Newbridge, down through Taff Vale, which in those days was called Walnut Tree, through Rhadder, Llandaff, down into Cardiff, and then down into Cardiff Docks. It opened on the 9th of October 1840, and as you can see from this photo here, the original station was just called Cardiff because it was the first line down to Cardiff. If you look at this map, you can see the canals around Cardiff and just one railway. It predated the South Wales Railway. At the terminus down in Cardiff Docks, as it was called when it opened, the Taff Vale set up their headquarters, and this building is still here today. They had a very famous engineer. One of the backers of the railway, Anthony Hill, started talking to a friend of his who was into railways. Now, Anthony was basically the owner of the Plymouth Ironworks up in Merthyr Tydfil. And so he had a lot of very powerful friends, and he had a friend who was into railways. Now, a lot of us have a friend who is into railways. We all know someone who's into railways, and let's be real now, if you don't, look closely because it could be you. However, this friend was called Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Yes, that Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the one that built the great steamships, the Clifton Suspension Bridge, and built the South Wales Railway, the Great Western Railway, that eventually came to Cardiff. They asked him, would he be interested in engineering the line? And Brunel accepted. Brunel bucked the trend, well, for himself anyway, and built this line to what they then called narrow gauge. You see, Brunel was a big fan of broad gauge, 7 foot. It was basically faster, safer, and gave a better comfort to people who were travelling in the trains. But he looked at this line and said, nope, we'll build it to narrow gauge, what we today call standard gauge. Why? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, the topography. This line literally just hugs the Taff Vale. There are lots of bridges around the place, and to his credit, Brunel built them made of stone. A lot of bridges were made of wood in those days, and these he made of stone, and today you can see some of the original bridges still in place. But the other reason was, well, it was just a mineral line. It was just a small backwater line. Maybe he didn't think that putting this up at broad gauge would have been a good idea. And he used his ingenuity to get over a very interesting problem. You see, just past this station here at Abercynon, there's an incline of 1 in 19 in those days up to Quakers Yard. Now, it's still a bit of a hill up there, but in those days, that was too much for any locomotive to go up. And so we installed a stationary engine to drag the wagons up there to get them to the top, where they'd hook up again to the locomotive and head on up to Merthyr. And by the way, from day one, there were passenger services as well. And yes, the passenger coaches were hauled up and down the incline as well. Detached from the engine at the bottom, hauled up to the top, detached from an engine at the top, and continuing on their journey. In 1864, they built a diversion, and the stationary engine, at least on that line, was no longer needed. In 1841, they opened the link up to Merthyr. The Taff Vale, having settled in between Merthyr and Cardiff, then looked to expand, and boy, did they expand. They built new lines where they needed to, but also they acquired. So, for example, they wanted to go to Aberdare, which is to the left here, roughly where this train is departing to. But that line had been built by the Aberdare Railway Company. So what they did, which was clever, was negotiated a lease on that line so only they could run their trains ad infinitum for the rest of the life of the company, and ended up acquiring it at a later stage. On occasions, there was a little bit of overlap between shareholders. So, for example, the Penarth Dock and Railway was a company that built, well, Penarth Dock, but also a railway that came off the Taff Vale at Rudder down through Fairwater to Cogan, at which point one line went down to Penarth and the other one went down into the dock. It had exclusive running rights for the Taff Vale, and later they extended from Penarth right round through Sully and ended up at a place called Biglis Junction, which today is known as Cadoxton. This expansion, wherever there were collieries opening and wherever they could get their lines, meant that at the height, this is what their network looked like. From their line from Merthyr to Cardiff, they expanded right across southeast Wales, going out as far as Cowbridge and Aberthaw. And as things expanded, well, so did they. They built the Penarth Dock because they had a falling out with the Buttes, who wouldn't expand the docks down in Cardiff. But eventually they did. They built Roath Dock and Alexandra Dock, and the Taff Vale were ready for it. They built a branch line that went around the top of Cardiff down into those docks. So again, they had access. As I've shown in another video, today there's hardly anything left to show there was ever a railway here. In fact, this bridge at Penlan Hill has been completely filled in either side, and you'd be hard pushed to know there was even a railway here. They also built their own locomotives. They were never self-sufficient, but they began building them in 1856. They opened a locomotive works down in Cardiff Bay, opposite what is now Cardiff Bay Station. This is the map showing what it looked like when it opened, and then in later years it expanded significantly. And they had a transverser which they used to get the loco between the sheds. The last Cardiff-built locos entered service in 1903. One of the styles of loco they were famous building was what's known as the 062, 6 driving wheels and 2 wheels at the back. They were tank locomotives, so they had no tender, and they were very powerful. They suited the South Wales valleys very well, and it wasn't just the Taff Vale that went for this style. Other railway companies, including the Rumney, also built locomotives to this style. The M-Class and the O-Class were both typical examples of this locomotive, and a lot of them survived to go into Great Western hands at grouping. It says a lot about the standards of the build of Taff Vale locos that over 100 locomotives lasted long enough to be incorporated into British Rail at the start of 1948. From day one, the Taff Vale ran passenger services, initially, as I say, from Navigation Road, but up from Merthyr, as I say, down the incline. A station called Newbridge, which was Pontypridd, a station called Walnut Tree Junction, which of course is Taff Vale, one at Penturk, which is no longer there, though you can still see the station house. In 1891, they had a new general manager called Eamon Beasley, and he looked at the passenger services and said, we could do more. There were at the time interurban tram services up here in the valleys, going between all the different towns where railways were running. And he was saying, well, surely we should be doing more to get more passengers onto our services. And so in 1903, he introduced steam motor cars. Now, I've talked about these with the Alexander Dock Newport Railway, but the TVR, again, were one of the pioneers building their own. It was low cost and also meant that they could serve wayside halts. And by halts, it literally was climb down the stairs onto maybe a bit of gravel, and that was about it. They were able to open these up, trial them. Did they work? Yes. Did they not? No. And that way they could build up the services. So, for example, one I covered at Landock near to Cogan Junction was opened as part of this trial. That one, by the way, didn't survive. When the Railways Act came about in 1921, the Taff Vale were a really significant railway, and they were part of the railways that amalgamated into the GWR rather than being taken over. They took a large number of their stock, especially the 062s, and gradually the Taff Vale brand disappeared and GWR took over. After grouping came nationalisation, and after nationalisation, rationalisation. The lines through to Cadoxton, the Lantricent lines, all the small branch lines serving collieries. As the collieries closed, so did the lines. The line to Aberdare lost its passengers, and the City line likewise. However, they came back in the 1980s, and today the Aberdare branch, along with the Mearth branch and the line up to Treherbert, are all electrified. Well, what's left? Well, there are actually two preserved Taff Vale Railway locos. The first one was a Class 01, numbered 28. It was taken into the Great Western Railway fleet, but withdrawn in 1926. But it was found to be in such good condition, in actual fact, the government bought it for their military railway. It was named Gordon for a while and kept in immaculate condition. After the Second World War, it was sold to the National Coal Board, who then donated it back to British Railway and the British Transport Board for preservation. It was stored in Caerphilly Works for some time. It went to Swindon for preservation, which didn't happen, then came back again. It was actually the Caerphilly Railway Society who preserved it. Today, it's down on the Gwylly Railway. But the other Taff Vale Railway locomotive that was preserved was number 85. It was an 02 and again went into the Great Western Fleet. In 1927, it was withdrawn and offered for sale and went to a colliery in County Durham, along with a couple of other Taff Vale Railway locos. And it remained there right through until 1968. A preservation society bought it and tried to preserve it. It didn't work out, and so they sold it to the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, and it arrived on that line in 1970. It's currently still in service on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. Its boiler certificate expires in 2026. Hopefully it's not going to be long before it's back out on the lines again. The final legacy of the Taff Vale is just how much it makes up of today's Valley Line network. If you look at this map, you can see everything here coloured in blue is ex-Taff Vale Railway. They really did make a significant impact on the railways in this area. As I said, the lines are electrified and soon Class 398 tram trains will be taking over. And I do wonder what Brunel would have thought, seeing these little tram trains pootling up and down this valley every 10-15 minutes with electrified lines, shifting huge numbers of people and absolutely monstering the speed that he built this line for. As an innovator, I actually think he'd approve. So that's it from the Taff Vale Railway. 10 minutes on a railway like this. I reckon there's 9 years worth of videos in this lot alone. We'll see how that goes. Please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, tell your friends, and until next time.